I want to transport you straight away to Rome in 1667 on the night of August the 1st. It's a dark, sultry night, oppressive heat as it always is in Rome in the middle of summer. And Francesco Borromini has already been in his room for several days with what has been diagnosed as bouts of feverish melancholy. He's been dismissed from his post at St John's Lateran. There are cracks appearing in the facade, or at least in the walls of St Ivo alla Sapienza. He's been dismissed also by the Oratarians, who are his great patrons. He's a retiring, melancholic loner, and during the night, when one of his servants refuses to keep the light that he wanted on so that he could keep sketching, one of his servants refuses to do it, in a kind of fit of pique, he gets up and throws himself on an antique sword which is at the end of his bed. And so ends the life of one of the great sort of geniuses of the 17th century. When we're talking about the time of Galileo, the time of Shakespeare, and of all of these innovative thinkers. Now, his death is as unexpected as much of his architecture is. He would have been considered the genius of his age had he not had the misfortune to be born 10 months after Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Gian Lorenzo is the exact opposite. He's an outgoing, charismatic, witty, good-looking man, impossibly well-connected, ambitious and efficient. Right, these two people are going to be vying for commissions in Baroque Rome, which is now going to be the sort of splendour of the Roman Catholic Church. And so I want to say that the story of these two men, of their exceptional careers and the great rivalry that grew between them, splitting them apart as it grafted them together, is one of ambition and desire, antagonism and hope. It's the contradictory tale of how one artist thrived by embracing the world and how the other withered by withdrawing from it. It's the story of their antagonism and of their superb architecture that sprang from it. Magnificent churches and chapels and palaces, buildings that reveal the power of the architect's imagination and that still 4 centuries after they were built have the power to astonish. Now, this is Jake Morrissey who writes again, if anyone invented Rome we know today, it's Bernini and Borromini. It was their passion, their vision, which gave us the Rome of extravagant churches of travertine and broad piazzas of granite, the Rome of towering domes that reach towards God, and the expansive palazzi that declare the power of man, the Rome we remember and the Rome that we dream of. So I want to start looking at, in particular, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and in particular looking at the times and the ideas which are going to shape the work of these two men. They are born in the time of the papacy of the Borghese Pope, who is Pope Paul V. Now, we're at a time when the Protestant Reformation is threatening the power of the Catholic Church. In 1517, Luther, of course, has pinned his theses to the door of the church, and basically Protestantism is going to be looking at reforming the church, and in particular the way in which the churches welcome the faithful. Now, Protestantism is based on 3 tenets. First one, sola scriptura, only scripture. In other words, you don't need to go through the hierarchy of the church for salvation. Sola fide, by faith alone. And sola, is it gloria? Sola gratia, in other words, only through the grace of God. In other words, there's a certain idea of predestination, and it doesn't matter what kind of good works you do. And there are 2 other tenets of Protestantism, with a solo Christo, only through Christ, and also solo Deo gratia, again through the grace of God. Now, the Council of Trent meets in 1545 and is going to meet 3 times to work out a response to the growing threat of Protestantism, which of course takes off in the northern countries, comes down through the Netherlands and is threatening the northern part of Italy. And so that's where the Council of Trent takes place. And they are going to rebut each of these tenets of the Protestant faith. And I'm telling you this because, of course, it has a great influence on the form of worship and the way in which the popes are going to patronise artists and architects to put forward their ideas. So the first thing that the Roman Catholic Church at Trent is going to emphasise is the importance of the sacraments, and in particular the sacrament of communion. And so we're going to see how important this is in the churches that are built. You're going to have massive baldacchino in, for example, St. Peter's, emphasising the altar where the faithful come as pilgrims. They're also going to emphasise the worship of saints and angels and the cult of the Virgin Mary. And so this is going to lead to enormous numbers of commissions of sculptors and painters who are now going to have to put forward the stories of these saints. And of course the importance of relics, which are supposed to be the concrete connection on earth of the glory of heaven, right? The saints were supposed to be at the same time partially on earth through their remains and in heaven at the same time. And the St. Peter's, of course, is the greatest reliquim of all, as it had the bones or the relics of St. Peter, the first pope, and of course of St. Paul. And the churches throughout Rome have a collection of odd tibias and knee bones and so on, even the head of St. Sylvester. So these things then are extremely important. They're also going to fight back with this idea of good works, and this is going to be the basis of the movements of the congregations, such as the Jesuits, the Trinitarians, and the Oratians, each of whom are going to set up brotherhoods which are going to go out and preach to the faithful. All right, so at this time, the Borghese Pope is not an aesthete. He is a man who has a dynamic vision of the church. And so he wants Rome to become again the centre of pilgrimage, where people are going to come and flood in to worship in the centre of Catholicism. What he wants out of architects, and so he's going to be searching for people, who can put forward this vision of the world, put forward for people who are illiterate, who actually can't read the sola scriptura, gospel truth. And so these people now have to be informed via the modelling of space, via the modelling of figures, via artwork, which is going to recount, the stories of these saints, the stories of Mary and so on. So what he wants are people who can create the theatre of Catholicism, the emotions and the human side of it. So these then are the ideas behind the search that Pope Paul will have for someone who can do this work. Now, we now turn to the beginning of Gian Lorenzo's life and sort of see how fortunate he was. Now, he came from, he was born in Naples, and this is quite an important point because underneath the veneer of Mr. Perfect actually lies, as we'll see, a Neapolitan thug. In fact, in many ways, he has all of the sort of ideas of the honour codes which pertain to that particular area. However, his father, Pietro, who is a good sort of jobbing sculptor, is called up to Rome to take part in this extraordinary expansion of the theatre of Catholicism. And so they all come up to Rome, called by Pope Paul. And in Santa Maria Maggiore, one of the great pilgrim churches, Pietro Bernini, with his little boy, who is about 8 or 9 years old, will start work on the Pauline Chapel. Now, the Pauline Chapel is the chapel that Pope Paul is building for himself and for his tomb. And as we'll see later, what the popes were interested in was not just creation of the kingdom of God, but the creation of their own family structures. And so this is why whenever I reference a pope, I reference the family that they belong to, because each time a pope comes to power, he immediately appoints the cardinals as cardinal nephews. In Italian, that is nipote, and this is where you get nepotism coming from. These cardinals often weren't ordained priests. So each of these great families, when they come over, they'll take over parts of Rome and start building their family mortuary chambers. So this is the Pauline Chapel in Santa Maria Maggiore, an extraordinary Baroque creation built around the sacred image of Santa Maria del Popolo. This is supposed to be the great image, supposed to have been painted by St. Luke himself, and which is Salus Populi, the health of the people, and which is paraded through the streets at times of the plague, and so on. And so he has this sacred image, and he asks Bernini's father to actually produce this Assumption of the Virgin in the chapel. So this is taken from Bernini's father. You get a rather astonished looking Virgin being pushed up by these little cherubs. Now evidently people now can actually, the art historians say that they can see the hand of the very young Gian Lorenzo even at this stage. So basically, this is the beginning of the career of a man who will be incredibly in sync with his age. All right, he is going to be the great sculptor. He's a great architect. He's a great painter. He's an impresario, and added to all of this, he has sort of no scruples. He's a man who will use other people, a networker, impossibly well connected. And what happens is that the Pope hears about this little prodigy and brings him into his presence. And Gian Lorenzo, he says, well, you know, are you as good as you're supposed to be? And so the little boy says, well, what would you like me to draw? And in other words, it's the head of St. Paul. The Pope is so amazed that he immediately fills the little boy's hands with golden scudi and gives him into the care of Maffeo Barberini. Now, Maffeo Barberini is a cardinal, and he will be the next pope, all right? So already you have little Bernini constantly at the absolute upper echelons of the art world, of the world of patrons, and the world of the popes. So he is given full run of the Vatican Library, and so is taught to sketch and work from the antique. Now, his first works appear very, very early. This is a little church just near Santa Maria Maggiore, which we'll be visiting, Santa Prassedi, which was created actually in the 4th century and has magnificent mosaics. But what is of interest to us is this particular bust of Monsignore Santoni, probably sculpted when Bernini is about 10 or 11. And you can see, even though he's never met the man, you're going to sort of see the two of these works, very early works, show us two things that Bernini always will do. First of all, this ability to get a likeness, a psychological likeness, which is what he wants, all right? This is what he's going to do with sculpture. He's going to turn it into, this marble are going to turn into humans. And so even at this young age, he's able to get this sort of expression on the face of this person whom he actually hasn't met. He gets this, there's a moment when he looks as though he's about to say something. When he's about 14, he sculpts San Lorenzo, St. Lawrence. Now, St. Lawrence is one of the great saints who's venerated in Rome. He was supposedly martyred by the Romans. The Romans are always seen as the bad guys in the Christian church. All right, don't always believe it. Another lecture should be on that. Anyhow, the story goes that San Lorenzo was grilled on a kind of a barbecue, and the story is that as his flesh was catching fire, there's this moment when the burning flesh turns into the smell of ambrosia. All right, so what the young Gian Lorenzo is already able to do, and what he's trying to capture, is this moment between pain and ecstasy. All right, he's trying to capture that psychological moment when one goes from the human to the divine, this transition from one state to another. And so this is really this beginning of this swooning head, which of course you will see very much later on in the statue of Saint Teresa. Now, because he has... what happens actually in Rome at this time is that all of the cardinals are sort of swaggering around, putting their family in the limelight, swaggering for Christ in many ways, but also interested in great patrons of the art. Right? These are the people who have the money and the desire to find great artists. And through his uncle, he's one of the papal nephews, he knows of Gian Lorenzo, and so he will become the great patron of this little boy. Now, this then is, I'll talk actually about the portrait busts later. I just wanted to introduce you to Scipio Borghese. Now, like all of the papal families, he will build an amazing villa. This is the Villa Borghese in the Pincian Gardens, just out near the centre of Rome. If you look at all the other popes, the Barberini popes, there's Palazzo Barberini, you get the Pamphili Pope who we'll meet. Also there's the magnificent palace which was put up by him as well. And they fill them with the most valuable art that they can find. And the purpose of these palazzi was not just to sort of vulgar showing of money. These were clusterings of witty, erudite people who came to discuss the idea of the ancient and the modern. So they would have, for example, the statues of ancient Rome, but they would have the modern statues which would be created by someone like Bernini. And so there'd be witty conversations about these ideas. People would spend their evening writing Latin puns and so on, very different from the kind of evenings that we would have now. And so he would use this erudite place to advertise the greatness of his family, and of course it worked very well for Bernini, who of course now will be seen throughout the world, the known world anyway, as a great architect and sculptor. Now, sculpture, up until Bernini, had been... the idea of it was to produce harmony. Beauty was related to harmony, to peace, and sculptors tried to make men look like gods, all right? So the proportions were correct. There was this idea of celestial harmony. What Bernini is going to do is make these great figures of antiquity look like men, and he's going to put not just the human into them, but this idea of the psychology of these people, is this drama that they are undergoing. And so the first sculptor that he's commissioned by Scipio is this one of Anchises and Aeneas. Now this one is worked probably, he's only about 18 or 19, 20. This looks as though it is worked with his father. It's a sort of monolithic sculpture. The idea is Aeneas is supposed to be the founder of Rome, the founder of Italy. He flees at the fall of Troy. He takes his old father with him, and this is the little boy here who will be the future generations of Romans. Now already we're going to see what Bernini does best. He turns marble into almost like a plasticine, almost like clay. This is the hardest of all stones to actually work with, and it's the most brittle, but he manages to be able to make it look like flesh. And this really is probably this, he probably did the head and some of this part here. The rest of it looks as though it's worked with his father. So I want to now go on to the work that we know has been done alone by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Now, he takes all of these subjects are of course taken from Roman mythology, and in fact many of them are taken from a book by Ovid called The Metamorphoses, which are stories of gods turning into something else or men turning into something else. The whole thing is this moment of change. And this also is very much, within the tastes of the Roman aristocracy at the time. Now, what Bernini is going to do is that he's going to turn sculpture into theatre, and he's going to draw the spectator into the drama in a way that has not been done before. Before, you had a statue which you looked at, you might move around it, you might admire it, but there was no psychological connection, there was no emotional connection. You are very much looking at something, at an idea. This is a moment, an incredible moment of anxiety, of anguish that the spectator is pulled into. And Bernini deliberately positions the statue so that when the viewer comes in, he comes round to this side of Pluto. Now, the story of Pluto is the god of the underworld, takes a fancy to Persephone, who is the daughter of Demeter, and of course carries her off. And finally Demeter manages to sort of work a compromise where her daughter will be 6 months down in hell, and the other 6 months she'll be up in the world, and that's why you get spring and summer, and then you get autumn and winter. But basically it's this idea of rape, and in fact this idea of males pursuing females. So here we have the sort of the strength and the sort of arrogance of this god. And as you move round around the statue, as you're obliged to, there's this swirling body of Persephone, who is, and what he is trying to capture is the sort of moment of absolute anguish at the moment when she knows she is not just being carried off, but she's about to be raped. So there's this. You can feel this as you move around, the swirling bodies, the sort of the swirling drapery as you move. So here you finally come right round to the other side, and you no longer see so much the strength of the man who's going to perpetrate this, but the anguished, twisted body of this poor girl. Now, what Bernini has managed to do is not just add us into this, but also manages to make the marble look like flesh. All right, it's very much, a human this drama which is taking place. It's not really a god or anything. This is this person who's having her flesh compressed, and you can see the way it's compressed here as well. And also the tears on her face and this scream, a frozen scream, basically. And here we have Pluto, who just thinks it's a bit of foreplay, basically, not looking particularly perturbed. And down the bottom you've got Cerberus, who is, of course, the dog that guards hell, and he's baring his teeth. Right, the next one that is commissioned by Scipio is this sort of masterpiece of Apollo and Daphne. And once again, he has drawn on the Metamorphoses. This is Cupid, as usual, has sort of got his bows or his arrows mixed up, and he's shot at the Apollo, and Apollo is madly aflame with lust for poor Daphne, and at the same time Daphne's been given an arrow, which means that she doesn't, want him at all. This is, can be only explanation, can't it? So what you have again is this pursuit, and what happens in the story, of course, is that Daphne prays to her father, who is one of the river gods, and he, at the last moment, transforms her into a laurel tree. So what you have is this idea of lust, anguish, almost possession, desperation, loss, and utter terror, which come through out of a marble statue, all right? And the fact you've got a kind of a scene with two. So you start out again from this side, so you get the idea of the running, and you get the swirling of the drapes. Again, you walk round it, and as you walk round it, you see just the moment, and this again is he captures just that one moment of metamorphosis where Apollo's put his hand on her, he can feel her heart beating, but just as he does that, she starts to metamorphosis into a tree. And so as you get round to the front, you see how the bark is going up from here, and she is turning into a tree. And as you get to the front, you actually realise what he was after, this silky skin, this beautiful nude, which of course is now turning into bark. So you get the idea of what he wanted, but what he can't get. So there's all of this sort of in the statue. Now, what was so amazing about this is the way in which this is sculpted, how her fingers are caught just at that moment when they turn into foliage, and her hair also turns into foliage. Now, I want to show you this even better through the light. Now, what is very interesting here is something that will start, a pattern that will start with Bernini, is that he doesn't do all of the work himself. He's clever enough to actually get someone else to do the parts that he thinks he's not good at. He has the idea, but it's carried out by someone else. And he gets a sculptor, not very well paid, called Finelli, who does this extraordinary, delicate work, and is never given the credit for it, and in fact goes out off the job in a fit of pique. And we will find this happening again and again. Now, the last of these statues, I'm probably spending a bit too much time on this, but these are extraordinary, is David. Now, David and Goliath. Now, we don't have two people in this. We don't have David and Goliath. We've had two people in all of the other statues. Here we just have David, all right, the young person. We have to imagine Goliath. And what Bernini has done is that he again walks you around the statues so that you come from the back and you get this extraordinary sort of tension, this moment when he's gripping with his toes, gripping the rock, about to actually just let go of the rock which is going to kill Goliath and change biblical history. And the spectator is actually in the trajectory of this missile. All right, so sort of Goliath's actually behind you. So he takes you into this drama, into this precise moment. And he's not a god, he's a person, he's a man. In fact, it's probably a portrait of Bernini himself. And he also actually very cleverly puts the eagle, which is the Borghese emblem, but he makes David into a young man, not some kind of a god, not the king who is the great lyre player. And so you get the lyre which is actually laying at his feet. So this then is the birth of modern sculpture, and you can see this if you look at the Renaissance sculptors. You've got Donatello with his extraordinary feet. I don't know if you know him in Florence at the Baroque, this wonderfully fluid body, mannerist body. Then of course you get Michelangelo's massive, brooding, godlike figure, and now you get the psychology of, can I do it? I'm going to, the courage, the guts, that moment that is going to change history. So you can see how important his work is. Now, he was a great sculptor, and he sculpts the portrait bust, for example, of his patron. Now, he's very friendly. He's not just someone who's given commissions. He's constantly in the company of these movers and groovers, and he has the idea that you have to capture someone to get the essence, is that you get them just after they've been speaking or when they've just before they speak. This is where they sort of betray their real psychology. And so you have this impression that Borghese is about to speak. You get these fleshy lips. He's not idealised at all. You get the sort of little chest, chipmunk cheeks, the little fringe peeping out. Also, some of the buttons on his cassock don't quite do up. So, I mean, you know that he's someone who eats a lot. The way he's even managed to make the sort of nose look a bit sweaty, as you would be if you're fat in the middle of summer in Rome. And also this idea of this speaking image, and the eyes are cut so that you've got a twinkle in the eye. The story is that he plays with these people as well. He actually had this bust ready, asked the Borghese to come and see it, and when he was putting the finishing touches to it, a crack appears, and within about 2 days, I think it is, or 3 days, he has to redo the whole thing. Anyhow, when Borghese arrives, he shows him the cracked one, and he sort of tries to hide his disappointment, but says, "Oh, look, it's really very nice." And he's just about to leave, and Bernini, the great master of theatre, whips off, the cover, and this is the real one. And oh my goodness, it's a great moment. He sort of plays with people. I just wanted to show you, this is The Lost Soul, where he actually put his hand into the fire, just so that you get that moment of anguish. And this is The Lost Soul, of course, burning in hell. Now, I do have to sort of say at this time that we look at these artists now, we forget that they were profoundly religious. And this is going to permeate throughout both of their lives, in their architecture in particular. All right, they weren't sort of people who sort of dabbled in it. They were followed the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola and so on. So we now, that Pope dies, the Borghese Pope dies, and who should become Pope now but Matteo Barberini, who had been the man into whose care Bernini had been placed. So there's another one of these apocryphal stories. When he becomes Pope, he brings Bernini to him and says, Rome is so lucky to have me as Pope, but not as lucky as I am to have in my reign Bernini. He wants Bernini to be the new Michelangelo, right? Every pope wants his Michelangelo, and they think they've got him with Bernini. So the Barberinis are an extremely ambitious family, and again cut out a sector of Rome. And round a place where you get the Piazza Barberini, you're going to have Bernini working on fountains. Now he's going to put the Barberini bees everywhere. It was actually a horsefly, but the Barberinis made it into a bee. I'm thinking it was a little bit more sort of with it. So this in the Barberini Piazza, next to the great Barberini Palace, you have the beginning of Bernini, who works with water. He's the master of water as well, of theatrical effects. And so we have a moment out of mythology when Titan, at least Neptune, calls the Triton to call back the waters which are flooding the world. And so you get this Triton sitting up there blowing through a conch and the water spurting out. And of course you've got the papal symbol and Barberini bees everywhere. So on all of the works of Bernini in particular, you're going to get the stamps of the different families of popes who give him the commission. Now, we now go to St. Peter's. Now, the Barberini Pope, who is Innocent no, it's not Innocent, he's, I get these mixed up, Urban the Eighth, isn't it? Urban the Eighth wants to really make an impression, really wants to bring the pilgrims to Rome. And he decides he's going to work on St. Peter's, finish off. St. Peter's has really been a kind of a building site in many ways since the 4th century, when it was started or initiated by Constantine. And Constantine begins with a basilica formation. In other words, you have a kind of a square with aisles on either side. So this is the old Constantinian one, which had started to be renewed by Sixtus and so on. And finally, you had built, almost completed by the reign of Urban the Eighth, the great dome which had been commissioned from Michelangelo. Now, Michelangelo had seen St. Peter's as a Greek cross, the whole of St. Peter's being in the form of a Greek cross, all right, which is like that, not like the Latin cross, but had died before all of this had been finished. So when Urban comes to power, this is going to be his gift, and so he sets up a group of architects to draw up plans for a new St. Peter's. And Carlo Maderno is the man who will be chosen to work on the facade of St. Peter's. Now this is important, not simply because he's an important architect who's but sort of lives in the shadow of Borromini and Bernini, but was a great architect of the Baroque era, is that he is related to Borromini. And this is where, through this is where you're going to get the meeting of these two men. So Michelangelo's plan becomes modified, and Maderno's is adopted. The plan is now for a Latin cross with a long nave, and the original Michelangelo church now simply becomes kind of the transept of the church. Now, this is important because of what I've been telling you about this importance of the Eucharist and the importance of the drama of Catholicism, because rather than walking in the door and being confronted immediately with the altar, you see it from afar, and it is the end of this process of pilgrimage. You've come from miles, often barefoot, through Rome, through the old medieval streets, and finally you get there, and now the church opens and you process down to the holiest of holies where the St. Peter has been buried. The reason St. Peter's buried there is because this was originally, of course, on an old sort of amphitheatre which used to be flooded for naval battles, and that's actually quite important because St. Peter's is built on shifting sands, literally, and it's going to have a great impact on the careers of Bernini and Borromini. So Maderno sets out this long sort of facade, which is not a happy solution, because unless you are actually up at Castel Sant'Angelo, the great dome of Michelangelo is more or less hidden from view, right? Because it's too high and it just goes straight across the front. Well, Bernini, at least Borromini, now comes into the picture. Now, Borromini was born in Lombardy. He comes down at a very early age and works as a sort of a stone sculptor in the workshop of Maderno and some relatives of Maderno. So in other words, he's someone who's had to pull himself up through sheer hard work and through talent. He's not like Mr. Charismatic, who from the age of 8 or 9 has been sort of shielded and in a little cocoon by the popes and the cardinals. So he's a man who doesn't exactly have a chip on his shoulder, but someone who's had to always struggle. He comes and lives down around the area just near the Tiber, in the Church of the Florentines, San Giovanni de Fiorentino, in little houses down there, not up in the papal palaces and the cardinals' palazzi, as Bernini has been. Now, he then, Pope Matteo Barberini Urban VIII, has such hope in the future of Bernini, who's only about 24 or 25, and has really shown no ability as an architect at all at this stage, but he is put in charge of the building of the Baldacchino in the centre of St. Peter's, and also to give him expertise in administering large projects. He's put in charge of the waters of Rome. Now this is again something he had no knowledge of at all. And so he's going to need people who do have knowledge, and so he will work with Maderno, who's sort of a bit miffed, and with Borromini, who works with Maderno. Now, Urban VIII's idea was to glorify the centre of the church. This is where St. Peter's relics, the confessio of the relics are. At the time you could go up, and the pilgrims would go up and put a piece of material down, touch the shrine, and then of course they add a bit of sort of divinity or holiness that they can keep or sell as it goes. So what there had been a competition, sort of the Pope had asked different architects to come up with ideas for glorifying this extraordinary moment when the pilgrim reaches this point. And it is Maderno who comes up with the idea of this baldacchino. Now, a baldacchino originally was a kind of canopy made of material which was processed through the streets. You know, you have saints going through the streets, made of rich materials. And you also, in Catholic churches, you had what was called a ciborium, which was a kind of structure with columns, which was always over the altar. And it is Maderno who has the idea of combining these two ideas of the fluttering structure and the solid structure. And this sort of, not everyone in the church was happy with this, but Bernini takes up this idea. And at the same time, he decides it's going to be put in bronze. Now, where did the bronze come from? Well, there was a saying in Rome, looking at the ancient ruins, in particular the Pantheon, that what the barbarians didn't do, the Barberini did. In other words, they took all of the bronze and the marbles from these great monuments to build St. Peter's, and in particular melted the bronze for this. But you get literally the transformation, the triumph of the Catholic Church over paganism, and so it's physically there. Bernini, of course, typically, manages to put Barberini bees buzzing all the way up. You get the laurel wreaths, the idea of eternity and faithfulness. And he has witty little things. He has little lizards. See these little lizards? And he actually uses a lost wax structure. In other words, where you have very good wax inside a structure and you pour the bronze, melted bronze, in on it, and the forms take shape. He didn't know how to do this, and he had to rely heavily on Borromini, who not only sculpted all of these little bits and pieces, but was responsible for managing all the other sculptors who were working and for all of the founding. So you finally come up with this magnificent structure, which even then Bernini had not worked out. And this is again something that will happen to him. He goes too far. He wants it too big, too heavy. And he wanted Christ the Redeemer on the top. Borromini, being someone who had technical expertise, says it's not going to work, it's too heavy, persuades him to actually put the orb of the earth. And you can tell that this is Borromini because he uses these scrolls in much of his architecture. So what you end up with is this magnificent structure, which you can see from miles, that you process towards, which looks as though, the bronze looks as though it's fluttering in the breeze. You can't miss the Barberini bees. Oh, look, can you see them all the way through here? Angels on the top, angels in the architecture, and so on. But it's an absolutely extraordinary piece. Everyone, of course, who looks at it now says, Bernini. Of course, it was Maderno's idea. It was carried out by Borromini. I just want to show you how it stands and what it looks like as you come down. Now, Borromini wasn't happy. He wasn't happy at all. He was paid as an artisan. He was paid 1/10 of what Bernini was paid. And his relative, Carlo Maderno, actually dies of kidney disease during this time. And the Pope, now that Maderno has died, appoints Bernini as the architect of the Fabbrica di San Pietro. In other words, the papal architect. He's about 28. Now, Borromini is furious that his work has not been acknowledged. Not only that, he'd actually tried to, he didn't have much money. He tried to set up a kind of a business with Bernini's brother-in-law, importing marble, which could be used in St. Peter's. But he wasn't a very good businessman, and he couldn't work out why they were getting no money until he found out that the brother-in-law was actually giving kickbacks to Bernini. So Bernini was also working on that front at all. That's the last straw, and he marches out of the work. So this is typical of him. He's going to sort of have these impetuous ideas. Instead of trying to sort of work out a relationship with Bernini, he quits entirely. So what do you do in Rome, right? It's a small place after all, if you're an architect and you're out of work. Do you wait for another saint to be consecrated, as was happening, by the way? This is one of the things that the church was doing to make religion now something that was happening in the here and now, not just something that happened in the past. They were creating new saints. You get St. Teresa of Avila, you get San Carlo Borromeo, who we'll look at next week, San Filippo Neri, people who were had 20 years ago had been working around Rome and in Milan. So do you wait for this? Well, he can't wait for that, and he can't wait for a commission. So what he does is that he offers his services to a very small group or religious order, which were the Barefoot Trinitarians, been founded by a Provençal monk who had had a vision when he was taking mass, or that he had to free Christian slaves. And so he produces or develops this very poor order, which is supposed to be patronised by one of the Borgheses, but really sort of isn't. They need a seminary, they need a church. And so Borromini says that he will do it for nothing, provided that his plans will not be divulged to anyone else. So he builds the seminary. This is San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, which will be, as we'll see at the end of the lecture, just about 100 yards up the road from a church that Bernini will build at the end of his life. So you're going to get these two churches right next to each other, showing the difference in the work of these two men. So here you get this, what is this extraordinary mark of Borromini, the way in which he'll take a small space and turn it into a dynamic, moving one. So instead of having something square across there in this tiny little pocket handkerchief plot, you get this undulating facade that draws you in. All right, this is these waves of marble and stone that go back and forth. Now, it is the most extraordinary small church, and this is the sign of the Trinitarians. Now, when you move into this tiny church, which would fit into the pillar, actually, one of the pillars of St. Peter's, that's how small it is. It wouldn't be very much bigger than this room, probably about half as big again in the length. So you walk straight into this tiny little space. And it is, as you can see, monochromatic, except all the walls are, with the except of grey and white, and the only colour is the cross of the Trinitarians, which is exactly under the ceiling. Now, Borromini, as I said, was a very spiritual man, and he works with holy numbers. So what we have here is he structures it with two equilateral triangles, can you see that, which have a common base. And he puts his compass in the centre of that and draws two circles and will trace the ellipse around the perimeter of those two circles. Now, what is important here is that you have the triangle, which references the Trinity, and the circle, which references eternity, time without end. And he's going to, it's very much like Gothic architecture in many ways, where the numbers are extremely important. And he places this ceiling, a kind of a dome above that, and uses perspective or tricks of the eye, as we'll see later, that he's the great sort of artist of this. He makes it look as though the dome goes right up, because he condenses the size of the little lozenges as you go up. So you actually go straight up into the roof again of the roof, or the dome, which again has the circle with the triangle of the Trinity and the Holy Spirit. So the Holy Spirit is going straight up, and the rest of this dome, it's like a master chessman has put it together, where you have hexagons, ovals and crosses all nestling into each other in the most intricate style. What he has done with this tiny space to make it feel dynamic and a space that is welcoming, and a space where the spirit is actually moving, is that he's managed to pull the walls in and out with columns, and they are grouped. I couldn't actually get a photo of this. They're actually sometimes grouped in two, sometimes in three, so you can't actually quite, there's no sense of real harmony. You're constantly moving around. You feel restless. You feel that your spirit and your mind is being disturbed in many ways, all right? So it's a very, very effective space, and it's a little cloister which I haven't got time to show you. Now, meanwhile, back at St. Peter's, we have Bernini, of course, who is now the chief architect, you know, the star of Rome. But he's a man who is quite keen on other activities, and again will use other people, and he has a raging affair with the beautiful wife of one of the stone cutters who works with him, and her name is Costanza Bonarelli. Now, even though she's married to a lowly stonecutter, she actually comes from the Piccolomini family who had given Rome two popes, and so she's actually a fiery Spitfire spirit, and he really can't get enough of her. And you can actually see this. This is a portrait bust, you know, it hasn't been commissioned by a patron. He just wants it lovingly in the house. You can see the way in which the sort of the nightgown is sort of falling away, and her breast is just sort of tantalisingly available here. You've got these fleshy mouths, which was just about to say, well, you know, go to hell or whatever. She evidently he liked being abused. There you've got the hair, which is, you know, the sort of bedroom hair, you know, messy, not particularly, clearly a sort of very sensual speaking portrait. The problem was that there were rumours going round that she was spending her time when he was actually looking at the Baldacchino with his brother Pietro. And so he tests this out by making it publicly known that he's going away to the country and lies in wait. And the breast, which has been so lovingly carved, he saw pressed up against the chest of who? Anyone else but his brother as they come out the door. Bernini loses it completely and chases his brother throughout the streets and alleys of Rome, finally into the church of St. Peter's himself, where he beats him with an iron bar. And it's a miracle that he actually survives. The Pope hears about this, and Bernini is just given a tut-tut sentence, that's not a good idea. Anyway, I'll marry you off to the most beautiful woman in Rome, which he does, and he has 11 children. Pietro, however, stays well out of the way and stays in exile for a number of years. What happens to Costanza? Well, we have our Bernini, the Neapolitan, of course, who works by the codes of the Neapolitan underground, the loss of face, literally, of honour, the sfreggia. And so he hires a man to take a razor to her and slice her face. She's then imprisoned, also bleeding face and all the rest, for adultery. So this then is one of the aspects of our charismatic architect. Well, in the meantime, the Pope dies, and we have one from the Pamphili family who comes to power under the name of Innocent X. Now, he's not the sort of bon vivant, quite as much of the art appreciator as the others, but he is a slightly crotchety but determined man who is going to try and aggrandise his family. Now, he of course wants to leave his mark on St. Peter's. However, there has been a problem. Well, under the previous Pope, Bernini, at the time of this cutting of his mistress's face, in fact it's almost a turning point, things seem to go downhill for him. He's been asked to add towers on the end of Maderno's facade. And of course Bernini, as we saw with the Baldacchino, wants to go higher, better, more extravagant. Even though Maderno had originally had the idea of having a small tower, Bernini wants it to go up to equal the dome of Michelangelo, of course. And he designs it. The design is accepted by the Pope, even though other architects have their reservations. But it's built in travertine, it's set up, but horror of horrors, cracks begin to appear. They appear not just in the facade, in the towers, but even in the dome of Michelangelo. Bernini takes to his bed and doesn't appear for weeks. When the Pope dies, and when the Pamphili Pope comes to power, he wants an investigation into what is happening at St. Peter's, and he sets up a commission looking at experts. And who does he call in as the chief expert but Borromini? Borromini and other people dig ditches, go down and show conclusively that the shifting sands and the water underneath could not possibly support. Lucky they've supported basically the facade as it is, but certainly not these incredibly heavy towers. And Borromini sets forward very clearly the engineering, or at least the architectural drawings, showing that it's too late now to do anything. Why didn't he ask me in the first place? Well, the problem was, of course, he was off in a huff, and of course the other person who worked closely with Bernini, of course, was in exile. That's his brother. So basically, this is one of the reasons why Bernini had this problem. So during the beginning of the reign of Innocent X, Bernini is out of favour, and Borromini comes back as the architect of choice for the papacy. And this is one of the things which is written by Bernini's biographer. There was actually a fellow who used to follow him around, a minor painter and art critic, I can't remember his name, began with a B, of course, Barberini, who sort of talks about and catches the gossip, because everywhere Bernini went, you know, he walked with a regal stance, he could get what he wanted by just a look and so on. And anyhow, he's the Cavaliere Bernini. Now he's Cavaliere because he's been knighted at the age of about 28 or something already by one of the popes, who has undertaken to build a campanile at St. Peter's, has failed, and the great weight of the tower will bring the facade down. This having come to the notice of the Pope, he called Bernini to him and severely reprimanded him for not having wanted to take the advice of anyone, and that anyone, of course, is Borromini. So what does Bernini do? He's now in the same situation that Borromini was in. Has been more or less fired from St. Peter's, the great building site, and so he goes back to his great love, which is sculpture. And this is when he's going to produce his great Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. Now, he is given the commission by a Venetian family, Cornaro, who want to glorify this counter-Reformation saint. Saint Teresa, of course, was from Spain. She founded the Barefoot Carmelite. She was a great mover and shaker and reformist in the church, and was a great writer as well. She wrote her own autobiography and wrote The Citadel of Faith, where she talks about the levels of prayer and how to reach states of ecstasy. And according to sort of, eyewitness scenes, that, she used to levitate during Mass and so on. So Bernini then takes on the commission of depicting Saint Teresa at the moment of her her ecstasy, of this extraordinary, the fourth level of prayer, which she describes in great detail in her autobiography. And he develops this group, and I'm going to talk about how it's situated in the church, of this smiling seraph, who's an angel. These are the angels of the highest order of angels that are all fire, usually, the cherubim and the seraphim with the wonderful colours. And he's putting an arrow into the heart of Saint Teresa, who is falling back, sort of swooning back in this moment of ecstasy. Now, what Bernini is trying to do, again, as we saw with those other statues, is to capture just that moment when the human merges or takes flight into the divine, the moment of spiritual bliss. And the best way of depicting this, of course, is by using the human body and also experiences that other people have done. So when, of course, you get the French ambassador who comes along and says, God, if that's, heavenly love, I know all about it. But that's sort of really missing the point of these. This is sculpted by a devoutly spiritual sculptor, as Bernini was. He got more and more spiritual as he got older. What he's trying to depict is this tumult of divine love churning in her, and he can't show it in her body. He shows it in sort of inside out. It's in her vestments, which are writhing and swirling and showing her inner sort of turmoil, which at the same time is accompanied by this state of collapse, of sort of utter bliss. All right, so you get the totally relaxed fingers, the relaxed barefoot, you know, because she's a barefoot Carmelite, and the sort of the head sort of thrown back in a moment of ecstasy. Now, Teresa actually writes about this herself, and she says, beside me on the left appeared an angel in bodily form, and she constantly references the body and the soul and trying to get this message across. He was not tall but short and very beautiful, and his face was so aflame that he appeared to be one of the highest ranks of angels, who seemed to be all on fire. In his hands I saw a great golden spear, and at the iron tip there appeared to be a point of fire. This he plunged into my heart several times, so that it penetrated to my entrails. When he pulled it out, I felt that he took them with it, and left me utterly consumed by the great love of God. The pain was so severe that it made me utter several moans. The sweetness caused by this intense pain is so extreme that one cannot possibly wish it to cease, nor is one's soul content with anything but God. This is not a physical but a spiritual pain, though the body has some share in it, even a considerable share. All right, so this is, first of all, Teresa trying to express in terms that lay people can understand this moment of spiritual fulfillment, and then Bernini trying to visualise it. And so here you get this extraordinary sort of sense of abandonment and bliss in her face. Now, what you actually have in this chapel are levels of reality. You have us as the spectators. We sort of feel that we're in a kind of a theatre witnessing this miracle taking place. You know, she's right, you know, she's not standing inside, she's almost falling off her cloud into our space. But you've also got the Cornaro family also chatting about it, almost in an opera box. Some of them saying, look what's going on, the fellows can't take his art, almost like being at the opera. So there's us who are real, you've got the family of humans who are also the dead and sculpted but are watching, and then of course you get the great event itself, which is staged through with these wonderful marble pillars so that it stands out. The light, you can't see, it comes from an invisible lighting. So it's the theatre of the faith, the theatre of Catholicism, which is brought to the fore. Now, Bernini was a great, not so much he actually wrote plays, but he also produced them. He even managed to have water coming up and sort of flooding the audience, which was sort of a great move. But he always pushes the boundaries with everything. Now, meanwhile, what's Borromini doing? He has become the favoured sort of papal architect, and he is given the brief of creating a church for the university, the Sapienza University in Rome. This is right near the Piazza Navona. And he does, again, what he does best with these curving walls. And here you have the floor plan. This is the most extraordinary church if you can get into it. Again, these triangles that meet in the centre and these ellipses, but this time it's not really an ellipse. It's going to be, it's going to go round in a whole lot of circles. So you get the ceiling seems to crush like waves, and the walls move in and out like waves as well. And not just, it's not a small place, it's a towering space, so you're pulled in and out and upwards through this extraordinary dome. And of course he's very careful by now to put the papal insignia as well. That's the Chigi there at the roof. And then of course on the outside he has this towering sort of turret, almost like a ziggurat at the top, with the flames of eternal love up above. Now, he had already sort of started out working on these spiral staircases. What does that mean? With this heliacoid staircase in the Piazza Barberini. which he will use several times. Now, he works very much with these ideas of perspective. One of the cardinals whom he works with is the Cardinal Spada, and who asks him to draw up a peristyle for him in his mansion. And so we have what is called the perspective. And so this, in actual fact, looks as though this courtyard goes on forever, doesn't it? In fact, there's someone standing there, and there's someone standing there. So what he's done, he's again exaggerated the length of the diminishing size of the column, so that your eye is tricked into thinking that it goes very far back. And of course there's a lesson in this as well, this idea that all things on this earth are false. It is really only, the human eye really can't trust itself. Now, we now get to one of the great building sites of Rome, which wasn't St. Peter's, but the Piazza Navona. Now, it was originally, it's a kind of an ellipse, is it an ellipse shape? Because this was where the games under Domitian took place. These were games where people defied each other in poetry competitions, and wrestling. It wasn't at all like the Colosseum. No blood was shed here. And it was called the Agonial Games, right? And from Agone you get Navona, all right? That's where it comes from. Now, the Pope, the Pamphili Pope, actually owned a small palace here, and he now wants to mark Rome, just as the Borghese have up on the Pincian Hill, just as the Barberini have down near Via Veneto. He wants this to be the theatre of the Pamphilis. And, of course, he also has an extremely dominating sister-in-law, Olympia, Donna Olympia, who actually sort of, pulls the shots behind the papal throne. Anyhow, they both want this to be a Pamphiliville in many ways, and so they gradually buy up the real estate, and the Pope gets Borromini to build this magnificent Palazzo Borromini, Palazzo Pamphili. But they want more than that. They want their own chapel, and this chapel, that's the palace, is going to be Sant Agnese in Agone. It's not St. Agnes in agony, it's she's actually in this Navona square. This was a sort of one of these numerous virgin martyrs who theoretically was sacrificed. She actually, I think, was probably put into the as a prostitute, because all the prostitutes were actually underneath in these structures at the time of the Romans. And he asks Borromini to develop a church for the Pamphili. Now, Borromini often has the worst commissions, because already other architects have built up to this level. So all Borromini can do is, he can't pull it down, he has to restructure it. And he manages, however, to have a facade which moves in and out with these two towers, with one of these extraordinary domes. And when you go inside, this is actually one of my favourite churches in Rome. I actually taught a cinema course there when we stayed in the Piazza Navona, and I used to go out every night and sit in this church. It's just, the nuns in the convent loved me. They thought I was the most devout of people. And I was also doing research on angels' wings. I had these angels all around my room, and I got the biggest croissant. Anyway, but it is just the most divine small church with this extraordinary marble that moves in and out. He uses this time the richness, because of course the popes want this for their own chapel, so you can't have an austere building, so it's got all of those wonderful marbles and gold going dizzying heights, and the walls move in and out as the other ones had. Now, what is wonderful about this church is that Borromini actually commissioned artists not to have paintings over the altars, but to have marble altarpieces. So the whole church is very harmonious, and so each one of these represents, there's the St Agnes being burnt and so on, and all different Christian martyrs, but there's a kind of symmetry about them which is extraordinarily pleasing. And this is from a girl who went to PLC for 12 years. Now, the problem, of course, was that, as in many of these great Italian families, no one can agree. The Pope finally dies. No one wants to pay for his funeral. Donna Olympia is trying to, even as he's dying, trying to get money out from under his bed. The family are squabbling, I'm not going to pay, he gave you more. And in the end, the body's rotting out the back. And all he finally gets is just this, his, tomb over the door. But out on the facade for the rest of the world to see, we have the Pamphili dove everywhere. However, he hadn't just wanted to have a church. He wanted also to have a magnificent fountain, all right? And what they had there before was a horse trough, and that didn't quite cut it for the Pamphili. So he actually, now remember, Bernini is out of favour. He's actually working on St Teresa. And the Pope puts forward this idea of a magnificent fountain because he actually wants to showcase this obelisk, which has been discovered, broken, I think it was in the Circus Maximus. So he wants that on his fountain. And Borromini comes up with a design with the 4 rivers. All right, now this is reference to the 4 rivers of paradise. All right, everything, of course, has a spiritual meaning. It's not just a geographic sort of treatise here. And also, by this time, Borromini has been given the job of bringing the water all the way from the hills to Rome. So he's done this sort of engineering job. He's designed, this idea of the fountain. However, one of the princes in the Pamphili family, not a friend of Borromini. Borromini alienated everyone he worked with. People couldn't stand him. Finally, even when he's given a knighthood, no one can even bear giving it to him. They more or less send it to him by post. So I don't know what, he must have been very difficult. So he alienated other members of the Pamphili family who decided that they're going to get Bernini back. And so they asked Bernini to come up with a small design of the fountain, and it's cast in silver, evidently, and put on the table of the Pope as he goes in. He's invited by the Prince in for dinner. The Pope, of course, sees this thing, he couldn't help but he'd trip over it. Oh my goodness, isn't it wonderful? It must be by Bernini, and from that moment on, Bernini is given the brief to do this fountain. Now, Borromini is absolutely furious. At the time, he's working on St John's Lateran. He quits St John's Lateran, takes all of his workers with him. Then they put in other workers, and so his workers go back and sort of beat up the strike breakers. It's an unholy scene, literally. So Bernini is back in style, and from now on he will not falter, and it will be sort of the downhill trip of Borromini. Now, what you actually have in this fountain, it's quite extraordinary. It's sort of built on nothing. You know what I mean? It's one of a tour de force, where you have a fountain which actually is totally vacant in the middle, but supporting a Roman obelisk, which is topped, of course, by the Pamphili dove. All right, the papacy taking over ancient Rome, paganism of ancient Rome, which had taken over already the worship of the sun of ancient Egypt. The final resting place of all things is in the Roman Catholic Church. The 4 rivers are depicted here. You have the Danube, which represents Europe. You have the Rio del Plata for South America. You have the Nile for Egypt, and you have the Ganges for India. Here you have, they each have different sort of, different symbols for them. The Nile actually has a tea towel sort of thing over its head because no one knows its source, and so on. But it's an extraordinary piece. All right. Now, the story is that you actually have the Rio de Plata. You can see the way they gesticulate. They're not just sort of sitting there. They're alive. The whole fountain is absolutely alive. The idea is that he's gesticulating against the horrors of Borromini's facade. It's absolutely not true. The facade was built, after this. So we actually then have the only part that Bernini does himself is actually this lion, which is emerging here. He has other people doing the sculpting work, which was perfectly normal at the time. But it is an amazing theatrical piece where you have sculptures and water, you know, the whole sort of drama of movement and sound that water gives you. And of course Bernini sort of, you know, milks it for as much drama as he can. He has a reputation for being the man who cracked St. Peter's. Can you trust him? So when the Pope comes out, he sort of says, oh, you know, is it going to stand up? So Bernini carefully puts a bit of string to the top and puts it down there and says, there, I've secured it, I've got 4 bits of string. And then, of course, when the Pope finally comes, he's really anxious, he's getting old, he's getting crotchety, is he going to live to see this apotheosis of their Pamphili family? He comes out and says, is it finished? And he says, no, not really, have to wait a few months. And as the Pope's about to go away, they turn on the fountains, and of course it's exactly, again, the great theatrical coup. The Pope is overjoyed, he throws a party and gives enormous rewards to the workmen. Well, unfortunately, he dies, as we saw, and we have, by the way, Bernini will work under 10 popes, right? We have, I've chosen the major popes. In between you have popes who last only a couple of years. Remember at the time the papacy, often when you were choosing popes, there were these fights or divisions between those who favoured France and those who favoured Spain, and often a compromise candidate was brought in, someone who was very old, who only lasted a few years. Dare I say, maybe the same thing happened with Benedict, you know, who was a compromise figure, but lasted longer than was expected. So here we have someone from the Chigi family, another of the great families of Rome. He is going to continue to patronise Borromini. Borromini is responsible for this work on St. John's Lateran, but eventually he's going to become too difficult and be fired from that. What the Chigi Pope is going to give us, I'm going to go over for a few minutes if that's okay, is St. Peter's, all right? The great square of St. Peter's, not a square, it's a ridiculous name, isn't it? But the piazza of St. Peter's. Now, originally, you didn't actually have this Via della Conciliazione here. There was going to be a third arm which came across here. And all of this part over here was medieval Rome. It was called the Borgo, Borgo Santo Spirito. And the idea was, you know, with Bernini the showman, with theatrical impresario, is that you came through the obscure alleyways of the city, which is the obscure alleyways of life, to finally this extraordinary space with St. Peter's Basilica up in front of you, and you process into, under the Baldacchino, to the St. Peter's relics and then to the throne of St. Peter. What Mussolini did is ruin all that surprise by giving you an extraordinary perspective right from the end, and it breaks up this extraordinary space. Now, Bernini went through a number of things. He had to work with the fact that the Sixtus had already put an obelisk in the centre, and so he comes up with this ellipse, which is with the short side, St. Peter's on the short side, and he was given the brief of making St. Peter's absolutely the blockbuster centre of the Catholic experience, right? And so thousands of people, the faithful, the unfaithful, the heretics, were supposed to be converted when they came into this space. And the Pope has his own ideas about what he wants, but he goes along with Bernini. In fact, he speaks to him every day. There's correspondence constantly. And Bernini finally comes up with this colonnade with 3 columns, which is 3 columns deep, which is slightly not square, so that as you walk, there's this constant play of dark and shade. And so the colonnade doesn't look rigid, it looks as though it's moving, and it's more or less embracing you, embracing the faithful. Indeed, what it's supposed to be is the arms of the church coming out to embrace those people who come to see the head of the church, the Pope, giving his, his speech on the balcony, and then into St. Peter's itself. So there are something like 300 columns, would that be right? And of course, on top, this idea of the importance of the saints, right? Remember, not just relics and so on, but the saints are welcoming you. On one side, you've got the female saints, you know, gender equality. On the other side, you've got male saints, and in the centre, of course, you've got the doctors of the church, all gesticulating into heaven. And I think there's about 140 of these with papal arms all over the place. And Alexander makes sure that he is not Prime Minister, he's Pontifex Maximus, all right, that his name is all over it. So this is the other side of the popes. It's not all for the glory of God, but for the glory of the family. So this is the Chigi side. You get the Chigi mountain with the star. You had, of course, the dove for the Pamphili, the bee for the Barberini, the eagle for the Borghese. When you go through Rome, you see these everywhere. This is just visions. Now, Bernini, of course, is the man on everyone's lips. Louis XIV himself wants him to come. Pope doesn't want him to go, but in the end he does go to France. The French have heard how he's the great, architect. Can he actually improve the Louvre? Well, he comes down, gives them his sort of great idea, and the French look at it and think, well, no thanks. Not our cup of tea at all. Bernini sort of goes back to Italy and says, thank God I'm back. These barbarian French really don't know a good architect when they see one. Anyway, he has left this amazing sculpture of Louis XIV. Well, at the end of his life, he is actually becoming more humble. He's someone now who each week practices the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, where you visualise the sufferings of Christ, which gives you the feelings of the emotions and so on, and goes to Mass every day. And he is now going to dedicate a small church to, give his services to an order. And he will build this St. Andreas, St. Andrew, on the Quirinal Hill, just about 100 yards down from Borromini's extraordinary, sober little church. And it's very small. It's not much bigger than San Carlo. But as you go in, you've got the same thing. You have the altar. This time it's actually on the opposite side. It's a sort of a circle, isn't it? Slight circle. So it's on the opposite side, a squash circle, yeah. Dedicated to the Jesuits, as you can see, Stanislas Kostka and St. Francis Xavier. And it could not be more different than the Church of Borromini. So I think these two churches sort of crystallise the differences between the two men, the sort of sober, mathematical, introverted, mathematician, whereas here you get this extroverted sensualist impresario who is glorifying St. Andrew, the brother of St. Peter, therefore very, very important in Catholic doctrine. And so because he was martyred, you get these blood-red columns as you go in. So this is what you see when you go in. And of course the light of God is also streaming down here with cupids and at least angels teeming around, very different from those geometric shapes that you had with Borromini. Here we have, as you go in, you're at the moment, again, this moment when St. Andrew, this old fisherman, all right, you can see he's got a knobbly old knee, he's sort of got arthritic arms. There's moments when this human person, who was about to become a saint, at his moment of elevation. So he's sitting on this cloud, slightly ungainly, about to elevate up into the heavens. All right, and look at this for a difference between the dome of the Borromini San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane. Here you've got angels hovering to bring him up. These extraordinary geometric shapes, but you don't look at them so much because it's the gold and these lights of beams of light. He's being beamed up into heaven up here, and the light comes in from the windows around it, so you get this kind of almost sort of ethereal celestial light. Well, when he wasn't doing that, in fact this is one of the places that he actually felt that he'd achieved the best, this particular church. And when his son Domenico, who's the youngest of his 11 children, who becomes his biographer, comes to see his father, he often finds his father, who's an old man by now, sitting in the church saying, this is the least bad thing that I actually created. So he's becoming more humble. And all he got for his work was a loaf of bread each day from the oven of the seminary. Now, in the meantime, he is, of course, creating the tombs of the popes. Here we have the tomb of Alexander VII. Each of them wanted to have not just an architect who would glorify the city, but and their own family, but themselves. And here you can see Pope Alexander. This is here. He was the Barberini. No, he wasn't. He's the Chigi Pope. Here, totally oblivious of the fact that you've got death itself under here as a skeleton, waving an hourglass. Of course, the sounds of the sands of time disappearing, and on the extraordinary use of marble. You know, he makes marble look like material, and you have these allegories of the church and faith and so on, with good old Alexander above it all, with prayer. Well, we now have the Rospigliosi Pope, who comes to power as Clement IX, and he's not to be outdone either. And by now we have an ageing Bernini, but he now wants to be part, the Rospigliosi Pope wants to be part of this great architectural structure which is St. Peter's. It's not just Michelangelo's dome, Moderno's facade, Bernini's piazza. He wants to be part of it. He wants to now have the lead across the bridge. This is the Ponte Sant'Angelo, the whole bridge of the angels, which goes past the Castel Sant'Angelo, which is topped by the Archangel Michael. And so he asked Bernini to set up these angels of the Passion. So each of these extraordinary angels, which I think are fantastic, each of them has one of the instruments of the Passion. This is the lance that pierces Christ's side, and they stand out amazingly, and they always will, because they're on the river. And so no matter where you can see, you have these angels with their wings gesturing into space. You know, they're sort of they're pulling us up, pulling us towards St. Peter's. Here is the sponge, which theoretically had vinegar. It was probably absinthe. And he actually, Bernini probably didn't, in fact, he didn't sculpt them all himself. Again, he asked other people to do them to his design. But of course it's known as Bernini's angels. There is one that he did, and of course he kept the most important for himself, and this is the angel with the crown of thorns. And this is in Sant'Andrea delle Frate, St. Andrew of the Frate, sort of willow trees, which is not far again from the Piazza Navona. This beautiful angel, but looking much more, there's much more human expression on its face than on that of the other angels. So, just as a postscript, meanwhile, his brother has been reconciled with him. Their mother had quite a difficult time with the Bernini boys, and actually is quoted as saying, that Gian Lorenzo, he thinks he owns the world and that he can do anything. Anyway, Pietro comes back, finally starts working again on St. Peter's, and this time is found by some of the papal police violently sodomising a young stonecutter in St. Peter's. Anything that moved is not safe. So to actually solve the honour of the family and to sort of hush the scandal yet again, he agrees to sculpt this last image of the Blessed Ludovica Albertoni, who was a relative of the Pope, a distant relative of the Pope. Blessed because she's Beata, you know how you get the 3 levels of sainthood, and Beata is the first one that before we all become saints. So he will sculpt this, and this is in San Francesco in Ripa, which we'll go and see. It's amazing. It's one of these wonderful statues that is basically from here to there. There's no one there, no one knows it's there, and you can get up so close and look at it. Whereas, of course, with the St. Therese, there's often a lot of people there, and it's further away. You can't actually see the way and the expression on its face. So again, we have this moment when Ludovica experiences ecstasy. She this time she doesn't have an angel. It's an internal sort of feeling of joy. And this is the last piece that he will do. So at the time of their death, we don't have extraordinary funeral monuments to these people. Bernini, you will see here, Johannes Laurentius, you always have your name put into Latin, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, an architect of the city, here lies in humility. All right, so he was actually beginning to take the, St. Ignatius Loyola's spiritual exercises seriously. And that's actually at the base of one of the columns in Santa Maria Maggiore. Most people don't know it's there, you walk over it. Meanwhile, in the church of San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, on the other side of the river, there is Francesco Borromini's tomb. And unfortunately for him, he has the ignominy of a magnificent tomb being created right opposite it, with a statue of Bernini opposite. Now, what is in interest here is that soon after, 27 years have elapsed really between the death of Borromini and the death of Bernini, which is why we get so much more work and so much more to appreciate of Bernini. However, very soon after Bernini's death, the whole Baroque style sort of fell out of favour. All right, it started to be seen as rather vulgar, over, sort of sentimental, and of course she developed finally sort of waves of neoclassicism and then of modernity. And it's really only, I suppose, in the beginning of the 20th century that people start to really look at the Baroque as being an extraordinary artistic style. And in many ways we're going to see this next week with Caravaggio, where you're going to get this idea of the great artist as an outsider, as a troubled person. But really, I suppose what we can say about these two architects, the great men of the 17th century, was that Bernini sort of manipulated space, whereas Borromini sculpted it. So there we go. Thank you very much.